Welcome back to Post Sports Live. I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe, and joining me in the Post TV studio, Scott Allen of the DC Sports Blog, Mike Wise, Post columnist, and Dan Steinberg of the DC Sports Blog. Happy rainy Tuesday, everybody. Let's get right to it. Big show today. We've got the Redskins preseason week 2. We're not going to talk about any takeaways from week 1, but we'll preview week 2 against Cleveland Browns, who have a brewing quarterback controversy, which is just ripe for discussion. And we'll do some fun RG3 versus Johnny Manziel tiebreakers along the way. We'll talk about what inspired Bryce Harper to drag his foot over the A logo in Atlanta over the weekend because, hey, why not? And get your guys' impression on how it's being viewed by Nationals fans specifically. And then we've got a little piece on craft beer's growing popularity in Major League ballparks. The Post, along with the DC Sports Blog, did some really cool graphic work basically logging all of the different types of beer options across the country, so we'll get you guys' thoughts on those. We have an A-Rod segment, and finally we'll wrap up with some NASCAR and sort of what's next for Tony Stewart and what's really to blame for what happened and transpired on that dirt track Saturday night. Not necessarily who, but what, off a column, Mike, that you wrote. Let's start with the Redskins. Scott, Monday night, preseason game 2, Cleveland, and some familiar faces are coming back to FedEx Field. How will Kyle Shanahan handle Johnny Manziel differently than RG3 this year?
It'll be interesting to see whether Johnny football starts. I think as Redskins fans, we'd certainly like to see that. I think already we've seen the Browns and Shanahan to an extent have handled him differently in that, they haven't given him the keys to the offense right away and said, hey, you run with it. And granted, he wasn't, the Browns didn't give up quite as much to get him as the Redskins did. Where it was clear that RG3 had to be the future of this franchise. So there's been some tough love with the quarterback controversy that you mentioned. Kyle has said that they're very similar players, and certainly they were in college. Johnny not quite as fast, maybe not as strong an arm. I think what Kyle learned in Washington, we may not see Johnny football, Manziel run quite as much this year as we saw RG3 as a rookie.
Would you agree, Mike? You think he'd be more of a pocket presence?
No, I don't. One, Brian Hoyer may actually supplant him as a starter.
Absolutely.
So Kyle doesn't have the threat of the owner stepping in and saying, wait, this is the #1 guy. You can't bench him. 2, Kyle Shanahan, to my knowledge, has just okayed the signing of one Rex Grossman.
That is correct.
That's the original RG3, if people don't know that. He was Rex Grossman III. And so everything that Kyle does, we know, is a ploy to get Rex Grossman the starting job. So therefore, Johnny Manziel will run the ball 85 times a game until he gets hurt, and Rex Grossman and Brian Hoyer are finally elevated, and Rex Grossman will eventually start.
Yeah, we're leading the show today with Rex Grossman and Kyle Shanahan talking.
Yeah. Aren't we done with Kyle? I'm glad he got a job, by the way. Good for you, Kyle Shanahan. Everybody else in the world interviewed you, and finally the suckiest franchise in America gave you a job. Good for you.
Dan, taking Brian Hoyer out of the equation for a moment for this question specifically, how do you expect Kyle to handle Johnny football this year?
So we're doing like a real show still? What are we talking about?
That's the goal.
Yeah, okay. Please excuse your colleague there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what just happened. I think that Kyle Shanahan is a proud and a little bit egotistical man who still believes that the system that he had set up here 2 years ago should work and can work, and that it didn't work last year because of the quarterback. And I think that he will run Johnny football into the ground until he's just a shred of bone and ligaments.
So essentially he said what I said, just more eloquently?
Eloquently is an understatement.
No, I mean, I'm not, who knows?
Obviously you're not auditioning for a job on First Take.
Maybe Johnny football holds up under the pounding, but I think that he will run. He ran in less than 2 quarters. He ran 6 times, I think.
Right.
In a preseason game. I mean,
but they weren't necessarily designed runs.
That's the same thing with Robert Griffin III. But I think that at some point you put the hammer down and say your job is not to get pounded. And he was already being looked at by trainers in his first preseason game.
Plus,
I don't like it.
According to my sources, Johnny Manziel's father hasn't been given the keys to the franchise himself yet either.
But you know what else Johnny football looked like in that first game? He slid. He looked like he knew what he was doing when he'd slide and avoid contact.
I think that's fair, but I don't think that's attributable to Kyle Shanahan. I think some people just can't really do it. RG3 is a terrible slider.
Well, that's been. Are there any reports out of Richmond on his sliding prowess? Has it improved this year? Do we know? Nobody?
He has gotten applause from the fans several times for sliding, but I don't know how they look.
Just stepping out of bounds.
But no, I mean, whatever. Kyle Shanahan, I think Kyle Shanahan thinks he can make it work.
All right, so you think he'll run a little less? You think he'll run the same as RG3 a couple of years ago, the read option offense? You're sort of on that side as well.
I don't think he'll start, but if he does start, I think he'll run a lot.
That's a good transition to our sort of a tiebreaker question, which I have, and I'm wondering, again, assuming that Johnny Manziel starts at least the majority of the games, maybe not week 1, but which player, RG3 or Johnny Manziel, do you expect to have more rushing yards this year? Scott?
I think it's going to be RG3. I think Manziel, like I said, not quite as fast as Griffin, and while Kyle Shanahan loves that he's very similar to Griffin, I think he's going to like to roll him out left or right and have him improvise like he did so often at Texas A&M to find the extra split second to find a guy downfield. And even though the Redskins doesn't sound like they're going to run Griffin quite as much as that rookie year when he was running to the ground, I think he does seem to have that speed back from his rookie year that was obviously lacking last year, and I think he'll edge Manziel.
So RG3 rookie season 815 rushing yards. Last year 489, but only in 13 games. Somewhere in between there is what you expect from RG3.
Yeah, 600 or so.
600 or so. Mike, what do you think?
I disagree again. Look, not because Scott makes a good point, but look. Jay Gruden and Robert Griffin III have both said they want him to be more of a drop-back passer. Unless their goal is not to do that, then I think Robert Griffin III will run a lot more. I don't think he will. I think that there will be a threat of a run, there will be a threat of a read option, and I always said that's the key. If you make the defense think that you're going to run, it's much different than actually dropping back afterward. So no, I like Johnny Manziel, if he in fact starts, rushing for more yards than Robert Griffin III.
Johnny Manziel, 2,100 yards in the 2 years he played at Texas A&M rushing. So there's certainly a lot there, plenty more than RG3's.
He's Indiana
junior
Jones.
And senior years.
He's more
college.
crazy than Griffin is in the open field, like where Griffin actually, I think, thinks about his livelihood. Johnny Manziel, if he dies tomorrow on the field, no, I'm serious. This guy has a devil-may-care attitude about how he. And you saw it in the preseason game. He put his head down as he was going into a block.
Yeah, and I think to some extent Robert Griffin III had that same mentality in his first year. And I think that he has learned for a bunch of reasons he can't do that anymore. He can't do that this year. He can't get hurt. He just can't. He can't do it this year. And so I'm totally with Wise on this. And that's not to say nothing of all the weapons that he's got. He's got Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Jordan Reed, Santana Moss maybe still. He's got Alfred Morris. He's got a bunch of other kind of third down back guys. I think he's got so many weapons around him right now. He has no reason to run that much, and I really think that they're going to make a concerted effort to keep that down. So I think it's going to be much less. And
I do think he cares about his life and his livelihood. I just don't think he cares about it as much as Robert Griffin III. I think he really has a devil-may-care. I'm a rebel without a cause. I'm going to do whatever I can.
I think even RG3 his first year had a little bit of that sense of invincibility.
You're right. That Cincinnati game when he got the concussion.
At the goal line.
How many yards? Do you think RG3 goes over what he had last year, 489? Rushing yards in 13 games?
If he plays 16 games, I bet he will have about the same as what he had last year.
About the same.
So less
Interesting.
Per game.
That sounds like a tiebreaker for another day. All right, let's talk about Redskins specific here, guys, or sort of anything you're looking for, Scott, from Monday night's game against the Browns.
Because we didn't get to see it last week, Deshaun Jackson says he's going to be out there flying around with his guys on Monday, expects to play, had an ankle injury that kept him out against New England. And just to see that the shiny new toy finally in action, what kind of rhythm he has, if any, with Griffin for those 1-2 series that they're likely to play. That and Lake Seastrunk, who, granted, it was against, I think Dan said 13 stringers, the 13th string for the Patriots or something. But he looked good, the rookie out of Baylor. He looked good in the first preseason game.
So did Silas Red. I mean, the backfield in general looked good in that first.
And then they both kind of got banged up as the week went on.
Right. Mike, what are you looking for on Monday night?
And I might be a little ignorant on this, but I just feel like the offense, based on the weapons it was given, based on the fact that I don't believe Robert Griffin III is going to be as bad as he was to start last year's season because of his health, I don't worry about the offense like a lot of people do in this town. I'm worried about Jim Haslett's defense still. This team will not win 3 games if it gives up more than 30 points a game this year like it did last year. He can't, that defense has got to become, if not a wrecking ball, at least a container in the way it wasn't a year ago. And so I want to see if Jim Haslett has a thumb on this defense.
If the offense is as good as we think it might be, the defense doesn't have to be that great to win some games.
It can't give up. If they're not going to outscore everybody 35 to 30.
True. You can't wait. You can't make a long-term push.
Are you going to the game?
Am I going to the game?
Yeah.
I haven't decided yet. I may. I'm thinking about it.
He's waiting for Snyder to roll out the red carpet.
It's a very toxic place for me. So go ahead.
That is true. All right, Dan, what are you looking for?
You know, I think this is kind of coincidental. Just randomly, we all agreed on separate things. But I was going to say special teams, and I think there were some kind of noteworthy things that happened with special teams in the preseason opener, to the extent that anything in the preseason is noteworthy. But you saw Kai Forbath, the incumbent place kicker. He missed 1 field goal. He missed another field goal that was called back on penalty, and he put a kickoff out of bounds, which those are things that you do if you're trying to lose your job. So I'm kind of interested in that. The Redskins punters, I think they have a punting battle theoretically going on, and they only got to punt once, I believe, against New England. So who knows what's going on with the punting. And then penalties I think in the first half, the special teams units committed 3 penalties for the Redskins. These are things that, I mean, last year was a historically awful special teams unit. They brought in a new coach, and there were definitely some blips in this first game. So I want to see if they can, I mean, I guess I want to see that. Mostly I don't want to watch the preseason, but I guess I kind of want to see if
there's a game to watch the preseason. I know everybody says week 3, but just because of the, the Manziel factor.
I don't know. I had trouble. I'll be honest, and I guess I complain a lot in general, but I had trouble with the preseason last time. I think maybe I'm getting too old or something. I just really was having all kinds of existential
I might just
doubts.
go to apologize to Kyle for all the things I wrote about him during his tenure here, and then I'm going to say, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry.
Take videos so we can get a couple of blog posts out of it.
Yeah, we'd play that next week's show.
Yeah.
What do we expect on the kicking battle? I mean, Gruden has said that he expects it to last through the duration of the preseason. But who would you say has the edge right now in the 40 seconds we have left, based off that first week?
I think Hocker. It's got to be Hocker. And I think he's got, all through camp, they've said he has a stronger leg on kickoffs.
You don't draft a kicker not to consider him,
This
right?
is the preseason. Wait till Kai Forgan gets into the regular season and starts nailing 45-yarders with no time on the clock. Just trust me on this one.
The Redskins special teams is that kickers are here for about 2 years and then they're out of town. And Kai Forbath's time, I think, is
shouldn't have let him go on Sean Sweezum.
Did you see Bruce Boudreau was at Pittsburgh Steelers camp hanging out with Danny Smith?
Mike Tomlin. All right, look at that. We finished 6 seconds early. All right, the producers are going to love me in the back.
We're really into the preseason when we start talking about former Redskins kickers hanging out with former Caps coaches.
All right, let's move on to the Nationals, guys. And something that was that the DC Sports Blog did some great, muckraking, if you want to call it, and investigative kind of journalism in a sense about some of the Atlanta Braves and the Washington Nationals sort of trading, disparaging comment. How do we even say this? The Bryce Harper and the A, obviously a lot was made of that over the week as he sort of brushed his foot over it on his way to the plate. But you found something different.
No, I can't believe we were talking about this, honestly. Someone told me, a fan who was at a Nats game in late June against the Braves, said that he saw that Irvin Santana, the Braves pitcher, kept putting his hand in the Nationals W. I was just joking when I wrote about that, though.
The curly W on the back of the mound.
Curly W on the back of the mound, but obviously he kept holding his hand. It was obviously his hand was damp and he was having trouble drying it off. He was using the dirt to dry it off. I was just joking. I don't think that it really matters much what you do with a dirt logo. But I think that to the extent that, I don't think it does foster this rivalry, but anything to get fans at this rivalry kind of into it is good. Scott wrote about on one of those rivalry maps where fans from different areas kind of identify which team they hate the most, and the Nats were actually the most hated team, I think, in Georgia, right?
3 states in the South.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. For a new franchise that hasn't had a ton of success to be hated by Braves territory, I think it's kind of cool.
I think that's great.
So Mike, what do you attribute? What inspired Harper to do this, if anything, or do you buy that he didn't even notice he was doing it?
It goes without saying. This paper once used to go into court files and find that a team had sued its own season ticket holders. Now we are doing this stuff. No, I think it is valuable, and I think it is. It's valuable because it gives Bryce Harper a role in the world to antagonize. because otherwise he's really not a baseball player that helps his team at this point. I mean, has he somehow broken out of some season-long slump and had some 4 for 5, 3 home run RBI night?
He had the walk-off last
Did you
week.
notice that before they went to Atlanta, yeah, he beat the Braves?
Yeah, it was a walk-off. And then you know what? The night he struck out in the 9th inning with them down 3-1.
Okay, you know what? Not to hijack your segment here, but to me, one of the most interesting things that happened in that series, can I hijack
Yeah,
this for a second?
hijack.
Is
Yeah,
that
go away. We're
Steven
freewheeling.
Strasburg and Gio Gonzalez both did the things that they've been doing all year. Strasburg got shelled on the road, got the team in a huge hole early, and Gio got his pitch count way up, way too early, and had to
Bryce
get taken out of the
broke
game.
out of it.
What?
What were you trying to say?
I'm saying.
You did hijack. You ruined the segment.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm saying that it's not that far away from the time when we're talking about a postseason rotation, and Strasburg and Gio Gonzalez, who are presumably like 1 and 3, I don't think are pitching like it.
Tanner Rourke, ace.
Yeah,
I mean,
Fister
it's
or
gotta be
Fister.
your starter.
Or the 4 and 5 could be your 1-2 in the postseason.
I think it's a fair comment. For all the concerns about the offense this year, there is a concern about this pitching staff. But I also, I just, the whole Harper A thing, I just feel like his role in baseball now is more of this juvenile delinquent than this second coming of Mickey Mantle. I think it's sad.
Yeah.
I think it's sad that he's becoming more known for this stuff than it is the other stuff. And the fact that Matt Williams would go ape over being asked whether or not he was going to be reassigned last week, after he sort of answered it not in the affirmative, he'll never be sent in the morning on a radio show. It shows you how much, like, Bryce Harper is one of the biggest distractions on this team right now. Not just by what he's playing,
I can't
but
believe,
by
honestly,
what he's saying.
I'm shocked that you're saying that. Go ahead, Scott. What do you?
How do Nationals fans view
I want
his
to go back
actions?
to the respect the A for a second.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, you dismiss it. But
Respect the W or respect the A?
both
Respect
the
the
respect
A.
the W and respect the A. I'd like to.
Respecting the W. The W has not won a postseason series in
hasn't.
its history, but we should mention that.
Go ahead, Scott. I'm curious what you feel.
No. I would like to think that it was an intentional act on Harper's part. Maybe he was maybe he was peeved by the Irvin Santana thing. But I think the thing that's lost is that just how fortuitous it was that we got that angle of Harper walking behind the plate. Because while Dan was doing the dirty work, finding the Irvin Santana smudging out the W, I was going back and looking at past games in Atlanta for seeing, how does Harper normally walk to the plate? Is this something he's done before?
I mean,
and that was a 1 in 100 thing. I watched so many at-bats of him at Turner Field, and all you do is you see him at the plate already.
It's
Right,
like that,
so you didn't
it's
even
like
get to
that
see the
scene
walk
in
up.
Good Will Hunting where you solve the answer on the board, a mathematical
Let me add
problem.
1 minute to that. I want to make this a slightly more serious for a second and ask whether or not and Dan, you were sort of getting to this about the bigger picture takeaways from the series against the Braves. Did the Nationals miss a chance to take down a reeling team and to make it a 6-game lead rather than the 4-game lead they currently have, and to sort of put the Braves further back in the rearview mirror by winning just one of those games?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all season long you've been asking us if we're like
Yes,
at turning point moments.
after
And
every
I
Braves
never,
series.
baseball's such a long season. I don't know that any, they could win the next 4 and the Braves could lose the next 4, and it doesn't matter. But yeah, to me, the more troubling thing is this history of not really playing that well against Atlanta, which is, theoretically a team. The Braves could still get the wild card. This is a team that you could be seeing in the postseason, and I don't think there's a great value in struggling against them, really. So, I think it is a
4
missed
and 9
opportunity.
so far.
Well,
They've got 6
I think
games left against the Braves.
That's the most sanest question you've asked during this segment. You're right. I think there should be a real concern amongst those players in that clubhouse that the Braves are the team that took them out of the NL East title last year. And they are a team that disappointed. And you don't want to, if you're Jason Worth and all those guys that were on that team a year ago, you don't want to get it in your head that you're leaving the door open in a year in which you could, these guys are giving you a reason to close it. They lost 8 in a row at one point. I mean, I just don't understand why you would let the Braves hang around.
Braves have a brutal schedule ahead, and Nationals have a much more manageable schedule on paper against long season. But this lead could be much bigger in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Scott,
I
did
think
they
the
miss an
Nats are in a
opportunity?
good position. They say that they feel good despite losing 2 of 3 coming back from Atlanta. I think the key to me was winning that 11-inning Saturday night, Sunday morning game that went 11, 2-1, ending at 2:30 in the morning. That is the type of game that we've seen them lose so many times before. They've really struggled in extra innings the last couple of years. And then to win that, I think, even though they lost the next night, definitely something to feel good about.
Similar to sort of like how they salvaged the 4-game series by winning the last 2 in the last series in Washington.
Right.
All right, let's move on to a much more serious topic, Mike, in craft beer and its explosion across the major league ballparks. Dan, who has the best beer offerings in the majors?
You know, can I give a little backstory really quickly?
Yeah, please.
At the beginning of the season, I got the beer list for the Orioles and the Nationals, and it was really easy. And I thought, you know, let's get the beer list for every team. Why not? It'll be cool. And it took like 3.5 months, and it was not really easy, and it took a lot of manpower, and I don't know if it was worth us doing this. But then our graphics team put together kind of like interesting rating system based on the diversity of beers that were offered at these different stadiums, the quality of the beers, and where the beers came from. I don't know that this was a scientific fact exactly, but the way that our system came out, I think the Seattle Mariners were first, and deservedly so from a lot of people I've heard from. The Cincinnati Reds, who just upped their beer game like crazy this year, I think we're second. The Reds have offered something like
100 Germans in that town.
139 different beers over the course of the season. It's cool, you know, and I talked to a lot of people, I didn't really get into this, but I talked to a lot of people about why baseball might be like a better place for drinking craft beer than like a football game or a NBA game. And I think a big part of the reason is because a lot of people, including me, go to baseball games for the experience and for walking around and just for chilling out and eating, you know, grass-fed steak with, you know, it's just kind of more of an experience. And so there's all kinds of gourmet food all around Major League Baseball, and I think the beer kind of has caught up with it.
I was just going to say, since these guys have already won the Public Service Award for the Bryce Harper GIF, I think this is a great topic as well. And have you been to Monster Park in San Francisco?
Yes, Monster? Is that what it's called?
What's it called now?
Pac Bell or whatever?
No, Pac Bell.
AT&T Park.
AT&T Park.
Yes, I have been
which
there.
is now
gorgeous.
what it's called.
Absolutely gorgeous.
This place, I'm, you know, whatever. I'm a Northern California guy originally, so but the Gordon Biersch garlic fries with that draft is some of the best. It's the best meal I've had at a ballpark. So I'm going to be preferential there.
Where was San Francisco on the list? Do you remember? They had to be up there somewhere.
You know, they weren't, and I think that was
Really?
probably a problem. They were kind of middle of the pack. And,
Oh, interesting.
But again, this is like specific criteria that our guys came up with. I think San Diego was like 8th.
Who
and
voted
people,
on it? People that read the blog?
No. I explained it a couple seconds
Oh,
ago.
yeah,
Watch the replay.
You're right.
But like San Diego, I think was 8th, and people say that San Diego has just an insanely awesome beer selection. So I don't know that this was like purely scientific.
I think possibly with San Francisco and San Diego, they had a fewer number of really good beers.
That might be
so quantity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having been to both of those parks. So.
Yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I'll give, even though the Nats are kind of middle of the pack, like Dan said, I've loved the addition of district drafts this year. I mean, that has become my go-to. I love the idea of rotating it every homestand. And I like drinking Natty Bo at Orioles games just as much as the next person. So
Natty Bo is a very
Natty
strong
Bo Orioles
offering,
game.
and I think it should not
That's
be
not a
discounted.
craft
I think it was
beer,
rated poor by our ratings.
No, but there is no question. I don't think there's any
snobs
question
out there.
that Nationals Park is home to a lot of wanderers during the game, and I think that this led to some criticism during the playoffs, where it was like, is this really like is this a big league market where people are living and dying with every pitch during the game? I know that I don't. So sorry.
They're out drinking beer.
One of the things that makes Camden Yards number 5 on the list. Flying Dog, Frederick's finest Flying Dog Brewery.
They got to get the Old Bay in there.
They do. They do have that in the center field bar.
In next week's edition.
Next week's
edition. The best half smokes.
All right, guys. Let's get on to A-Rod and in sort of a more national perspective. We're a lot on baseball today. Over the weekend on 60 Minutes aired the interview with Biogenesis founder Anthony Bosch, and he surrendered to the DEA last week and may admit to more. Right now, A-Rod's serving that full season-long suspension. He has 2 years left after that on his Yankees contract. $61 million he's owed. How will the Yankees handle A-Rod when he comes back, Mike, next year? How should they handle him?
I don't think they're going to have to worry about it. I think now that Tony Bosch has essentially surrendered to the DEA, I think that, and I watched the 60 Minutes thing with Scott Pelley, the rerun the other night, and all I thought was, this guy on the Mike Francesa show perjured himself. Basically, this guy could essentially be sent, if not sent to jail, he's going to have to do a plea bargain to get out of even. That contract will be voided under the Major League morality clause. I believe that if you're the Yankees lawyers, you have to go to Rob Manfred and everybody at Major League Baseball and say, look at this. And I don't think they'll ever, I don't think A-Rod will, if he sees money, it'll be a portion of that through an arbitration with grievance through the union. I don't think he'll ever see that money. There's just too many signs that point to his obvious guilt.
So if he's guilty, you're saying he won't play again then? Not just for the Yankees, but in
No,
baseball?
He's going to be a pariah like Barry Bonds. He's going to be more of a distraction than he is a help. And I don't think, maybe the Miami Marlins will get some ticket prices out of him for a year, if at all. But that's the only place, a place like that is the only place I could see him going. No one's going to bring him into the pennant race to help them win the whole thing.
Scott, what are your thoughts on how the Yankees will handle it?
I think he's going to remain toxic, and if you're the Yankees, you kind of have to wait for this to play out. And that the New York Daily News interviewed one of the prosecutors who was part of the team that brought down Manuel Noriega. So I think things do not look good for A-Rod. One of the guys charged was his cousin, who was very close to him, and for years has kind of remained mum on the issue and not said anything to really implicate Rodriguez, and now he may not really have an incentive to not speak out. So I think, like Mike said, he's got potentially a lot more charges coming his way.
And you would also agree then that you don't expect to see him in a Yankees uniform next year?
Correct.
All right.
It's so weird because I think if it was a sport like the NFL, I think we would all probably agree someone is going to give him a chance.
Yeah.
Someone's going to try. It's just a very different kind of conservative landscape, I think, in baseball a little bit, where people don't want to. I mean, I would still guess that he plays another Major League Baseball game at some point. I think, and if not that, I would certainly think that he signs up with some independent league team or goes to Japan or something, does something to play again, because he's not. I mean, he's not washed up, I don't think, on the baseball field.
Well, he's not nearly as productive as he used to be.
Well, sure, but I think he's going to try to play again in some fashion.
I think he'll try to play again. I don't know if a team will give him that opportunity. What kills me about all this is we're in this sort of love fest for Derek Jeter right now that's lasted a season long. And Derek Jeter doesn't have the raw physical tools and talents of an Alex Rodriguez. And A-Rod was the guy that went. And Derek Jeter there's never been one single association through a teammate or anybody with steroids. And I'm like going, geez, one guy's beloved today. Another guy's got more talent and better numbers to get into the Hall of Fame. And he's despised because he crossed that pharmacological gray zone. Mm-hmm. It's sad.
It is. It's a real sort of
opposite. Well, and also, I mean, to be fair, A-Rod wasn't all that popular even before all the steroids.
That's true. Even when he was playing his
best.
Anybody
that has a wall mural of himself as a centaur, not a good look. I've tried it. My wife made me take it down. The centaur.
How long did it last in the Wise household? No. All right. God, that's a scary thought. All right. Let's final segment, guys. Mike, this is off of a column you wrote today. Obviously, the big news over the weekend was the dirt track fatality that Tony Stewart was involved in upstate New York. Kevin Ward tragically died after he got out of his car after he was spun out by Tony Stewart. What's next for Tony Stewart and NASCAR, and what do you actually sort of attribute to this accident, big picture?
Well, I can't get into Tony Stewart's head. I don't know what was going on at that moment that he hit Kevin Ward Jr. I do know that a 20-year-old kid got out of his car and had time to think about it when he got on the track and started confronting him. And I wrote today that the road rage culture in that sport especially NASCAR, not just all motor, I shouldn't blanket all motorsports, but especially NASCAR, they're very famous for saying, we like to handle things on the track. And we like to handle, and a lot of guys that get into it in the pit garages, there are either there are often no fines and no suspensions. Only when there's a video camera and it looks bad on television does a guy see a $10,000 to $50,000 fine. And so the notion is, this is part of racing, and we get, you get angry, you get after it. To me, that culture, what Tony Stewart did during his career was a model for this guy. Tony Stewart's 23 years older than the kid he killed. That kid, all he saw growing up was Tony Stewart getting pissed at somebody and throwing a helmet at their windshield or getting in their face, throwing punches. So look, I think we've all been frustrated driving. We're not in sprint car races or NASCAR races, but at some point there's a synapses in our brain that tells us, don't get out of a car. This guy could be crazier than you and hurt you. And for him to, I really do blame a culture more than I blame what a guy's just genuine actions. Because tons of guys do that. He just happened to be the guy that got run over.
That's right. And the rivalries have to be good. The rivalries that, when those incidents are caught on camera have to be good for ratings for NASCAR. So there's a dichotomy there.
There's a WWE quality.
Yeah, there is. I mean, Scott, do you expect, what do you expect the fallout to be? Obviously, it's still very early. The investigation's ongoing. NASCAR, it wasn't even a NASCAR race. So sponsors to NASCAR and Tony Stewart specifically have mostly been mum to this point. Do you expect that to stay the same going forward?
Well, I mean, the first thing I saw when I saw the video and saw Kevin Ward get out of the car was this is the type of thing that Tony Stewart does. This is this is part of the culture. This is Tony Stewart going on Tony Stewart. And sponsors, I think people speculating about sponsors, partly because Stewart's reputation precedes him. This is not an isolated incident. Not to say that it was intentional. I mean, the police investigation will play out, but I think even before that, I think some sponsors need to think about, is this our chance to jump out, whether playing the morality clause or otherwise? And it puts Stewart in a tough situation because he's one of those owner drivers that NASCAR has a few of. So I think we could see some sponsors back out of their agreements with Stewart now.
Dan, you expect NASCAR to respond anyway?
I mean, I think the most sensible thing I've read or heard so far is Ricky Craven on ESPN saying, if nothing else, this should lead to like an absolute prohibition on drivers getting out of their cars on the track. And it's kind of shocking that doesn't already exist because, hey, there's like cars going 200 miles an hour around a track. But I mean, you've seen it plenty of times. And, usually a guy will climb out and he might like gesticulate or whatever and, be angry. I think just charging right in the middle of the track was a little bit unusual. But still, it seems like this would be a perfect time to say, hey, under no circumstances, with some kind of severe prohibitive penalty, are you getting out of your car on this track while cars are going around? And, if some kind of rule like that had been in place, maybe this would have happened.
Tricky thing there, of course, is after accidents, the cars are on fire. They have to get out.
Well,
sometimes.
sure, there obviously
safety issues.
Yeah,
but it's a good point. I mean, and you'd hope that there are more strict regulations filtered down to the dirt track circuits and those others that this actually played out on.
But yeah, I mean, I think that I don't really link this necessarily with two guys like shouting at each other in pit road after the race. This is like, I mean, a pretty clearly dangerous situation to anyone who was watching it. Even if this kid hadn't gotten hurt, it looked just
and several cars missed him before.
Right,
he was close to several cars potentially tripping him. All right, well, on that sobering note, we'll end the show. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Scott, for joining us as always. Your host, Jonathan Forsythe. Thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live. We'll see you next Tuesday when we talk about Johnny Football at FedEx Field and how that went with RG3. See you next week.